That Detroit Pistons San Antonio Spurs game I just watched felt like good old-fashioned 90s basketball. It was physical. It was hard-nosed. It was just a knockdown, drag-out fight. Detroit's strategy to slow down Victor Wembanyama kind of worked against them. You know, we all know the Detroit Pistons are a physical team. We know that's what they're going to hang their hats on. That's what they're going to bet on. You know, they're going to play physical. They're going to hustle. They're going to try to outwork you. They are a below-average three-point shooting team, and they are top of the NBA in points in the paint. That just ended up not being enough against the San Antonio Spurs in this game. Now, I will say this. Cade Cunningham got into foul trouble way too early. You know, I think he picked up his fourth foul in the second quarter, played through it, but the Detroit Pistons had to hold him out the end of the second quarter all the way into the third, and he came back in the third quarter and he picked up his fifth foul immediately. So Cade Cunningham getting into foul trouble did change the outcome of this game, I think, and there was a momentum swing at the end of the second quarter with Cade Cunningham out of the game that the Detroit Pistons never really came back from. But that could be where this is a double-edged sword. You know what I mean? They're a physical team. They want to bully you. They want to get in your chest. They want to knock you off your pivot. They also lead the NBA in fouls. So it kind of came back to bite them there. And I want to credit Cade Cunningham for playing with 5 fouls in the third quarter, still coming up with some crazy plays. He had 3 blocks in this game, and there was a block on Devin Vassell under the rim, or Stephen Castle, I think. I can't remember, but there was a block under the rim there with 5 fouls that I thought was just crazy because there was like 11 minutes left in the third quarter, and if he fouls out right there, the game is essentially over. But the game was essentially over anyway because, you know, him being in foul trouble at the end of the second kind of took the wind out of their sails, and they never really caught back up, and San Antonio just showed too much versatility. You know, that's what it showed me. I think this game showed me, if we're just talking Detroit Pistons versus San Antonio Spurs, this game showed me that the Detroit Pistons are a little bit more one-dimensional than the San Antonio Spurs, and I think the San Antonio Spurs, the sky is the limit for them this season. You know, they are 4-1 against the Oklahoma City Thunder, and this game that we just watched very well could be a finals matchup if the Detroit Pistons come out of the East, and of course if the Spurs can continue their run against the Oklahoma City Thunder in the playoffs. But I think the Spurs showed a level of versatility that the Detroit Pistons just don't really have. You know, once Cade Cunningham was in foul trouble, they struggled. They really struggled to generate offense at the end of that second quarter with Cade Cunningham in foul trouble and Janice Jenkins and those guys, Karis LeVert and those guys trying to generate offense. The Spurs, on the other hand, showed incredible versatility because what the Detroit Pistons wanted to do was bully Wemby, get in his chest, knock him off his pivot, and kind of take him out of the game. And it worked for the entire first half, really for the entire game. It's funny that I say it worked because he finished the game with 21 points, 17 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 steal, and 6 blocks. And when you look at a stat line and see 21, 17, 4, 6 blocks, 8 offensive rebounds, it's outrageous. That's an outrageous stat line. So for me to even say that they slowed down Wemby sounds crazy, but they did slow down Wemby in like a certain regard, like what they wanted to do. He had 7 points at halftime. He had 3 points in the third quarter. The fourth quarter, he had 11, 6, and 4 blocks. And that was, you know, they already had a lead and the game was kind of over by the time the fourth quarter started. But I don't want to take anything away from Victor Wembanyama's fourth quarter. On the other side of that, you could say he put the nail in the coffin. You could call this an MVP level performance by Victor Wembanyama by saying that, you know, they built a lead. Detroit could have came back in the second half, and Victor Wembanyama put his foot on the gas and didn't allow it to happen. So there's also that. You know what I mean? So Victor Wembanyama's stat line ended up being pretty damn crazy, but I thought Detroit's plan to play physical, get in Wemby's chest, knock him off his pivot a little bit, and make somebody else beat you worked for 3 quarters. The problem is somebody else did beat you. You know, the Spurs just showed way too much versatility. Devin Vassell goes for 28 points, 2 rebounds, 4 assists, but it was really those well, he started the game hot. Devin Vassell hit 3 threes in the first quarter, but in that like end of second into the third quarter situation where, you know, the Spurs showed their versatility, where Detroit looked like they had some good defense on Wemby and other players. Devin Vassell in the corner 3. You know, Julian Champagnie hits a corner 3. And they just showed that they have too many guys that can create from the perimeter at the same time. You know, you got Stephen Castle, De'Aaron Fox, and even Dylan Harper. I thought Dylan Harper's minutes as the third point guard were big time, and even sharing the floor with De'Aaron Fox. And so the Spurs, you know, the Detroit had a plan. Let's try to slow down Wemby, take away their biggest weapon. But the Spurs just showed way too much versatility, way too much creation off the dribble for Stephen Castle and De'Aaron Fox, and way too much three-point shooting. And that's when the Spurs ran away from it with it in the third quarter. And for them to drop 114 with Wemby only pouring in 21 shows that the Spurs, I think, are a complete championship level team. Now, Detroit's had games where they've outscored this total of 114 here. So, you know, it's not to say that the Pistons can't do what the Spurs did in this game, although they are a below average 3-point shooting team. You know, really Cade Cunningham being slowed down by being in foul trouble. And, you know, you also have to credit the Spurs defense for keeping Cade in check. And in the third quarter, Cade was really just missing shots. And now that I look at the stat sheet, you know, he was 5 for 26 in the entire game. I was watching the game. I wasn't really looking at the stats. I didn't even realize Cade was 5 for 26 in the game. So Detroit Pistons fans, you could also just say this was a bad shooting night for Cade Cunningham. But I do feel like picking up 5 fouls basically by halftime and then trying to play the entire second half with 5 fouls pretty much took the wind out of their sails. So, you know, if Cade doesn't get in foul trouble, things might go differently in this game. Jalen Duren, 25 and 14. He poster dunked on Victor Wembanyama in the third quarter. Jalen Duren did everything he could do to at least attempt to bring a spark to Detroit and try to get them going and rally and lead a comeback. But it just wasn't enough, man. The Detroit Pistons just didn't have enough flat-out scoring. And, you know, as a Sixers fan, I'm too used to seeing 30 minutes from Tobias Harris and 4 total points. So, you know, the Detroit Pistons just didn't have enough versatility, didn't have enough scoring, especially with Cade Cunningham having a bad game. And 16, 6, and 10, and 3 blocks isn't even a bad game, but with Cade Cunningham only pouring in 16, they just didn't have enough scoring, and that's what happened in this game. The fact that they only lost the game by 11 is actually pretty crazy. But this game, it just felt like a playoff game. It felt like an old school 90s playoff game, and it was so much fun to watch. And what I wanted to say before I get out of here is that this was a very good example of the new era of the NBA. You know, no more 3 stars, no more super teams, and, you know, the Detroit Pistons in particular, they're doing what they're doing by not even being a great 3-point shooting team. They're playing bully ball, and they're leading the NBA in points in the paint. They're bringing back 90s basketball, you know, and we'll see if that works in the playoffs, or if their lack of shooting and inability to score with Cade Cunningham struggling, we'll see if that comes back to bite them in the playoffs. But I had so much fun watching this game. This felt like old school 90s ball, and this is the future of the NBA. The NBA is in an amazing place right now. It really is. There's so much versatility. There's so much parity. Gone are the days of the Golden State Warriors and the Cavs being in the finals every year, and then every team just trying to build a super team to try to compete with the super teams. And there was just like 10 years of super teams. And unfortunately for me as a Sixers fan, Daryl Morey is still stuck in that. He thinks you have to sign a big name so that you have 3-star players. And then he fills out the rest of the 76ers roster with buyout guys and retired guys like Kyle Lowry and G League players like Justin Edwards. So the Sixers aren't going to win anything under this regime because Daryl Morey still thinks it's 2015. But this game between the Spurs and the Pistons was a great example of the new era of the NBA, and I had an absolute blast watching it. Thank you guys for tuning in to Run It Back NBA, man. Subscribe to this channel if you want these kind of takes on the regular, and do me a favor and hit the like button. I love you.